Do you know what really sucks? Is sitting down to edit your project and realizing that you have gaps in your coverage or shots missing. You need to have a really good, specific, and detailed shot list. Head over to filmmakersecrets.com/shot list, SHOTLIST, to get a killer shot list template along with some training where I show you step by step exactly how to use it.
The passion with which you tell a story and the depth with which you navigate through the different manners and are a student of that story and of all the things that create that story, I think is what separates one story from another.
Filmmakers have the power to evoke emotion, inspire thought, and drive universal change in this world. Right now, a real seismic shift is happening in the film industry. This is your best chance to join a new filmmaking movement. You have been called to create an everlasting impact with your unmatched, deep desire to tell authentic stories. So how does a filmmaker thrive in an environment that is almost intentionally designed to bring you down? That is the question, and this podcast reveals the answer. What's happening, filmmakers? It's George VK. Welcome to Filmmaker Secrets podcast, episode number 35. I am so excited because I finally got my partner in crime, Sinjin Jones, to come on the Filmmaker Secrets podcast. He is a very talented writer, even more talented director. And I would love for him to give us a quick little overview of everything that he's taking on, what he's done in the past. But for now, Sinjin, go ahead and reveal the one filmmaker secret that you've been keeping from us.
Oh my goodness. That was too good of an intro. That's not, one, appreciate you having me on here. Okay. Filmmaker secret. Here's what I think. Aim for awe and learn all the skills that will get you there. I think that's what I think that's my secret. I don't know if it's a secret. I might suck at it. Who knows? But, I think the aiming, I actually remember that when we were younger, is just starting out and all that stuff. There was this video. It's just called Awe, and it's a YouTube video that really shook me to my core, which is just this idea that we have a responsibility to awe, to enrapture people, and I've become super interested in this idea of the sublime and connecting with something larger than yourself. And that's to me all the cool stuff that art can do. And if you aim for that and use a story to get you there, if that is your waypoint that you're following towards the whole time, I think you'll end up somewhere meaningful either way, right? No matter the money or the challenges, because filmmaking is very hard and sometimes remarkably unpleasant. But you aim to tell a story that takes people out of their bodies, to make them their jaws drop with just the immensity, the density, the intensity of the story, then you've done something magical. And if you're aiming that direction, you'll get somewhere along the way.
That's
Is that amazing. A good answer?
That's a great perspective. I think you hear a lot of the word entertainment, and that's so surface level. It's the entertainment industry. What you're doing is you're bringing entertainment value into whatever type of story you're telling, whether it be theater or film or television. But thinking about it from sort of the behind the scenes look of what is it that you're actually bringing to the audience in terms of the awe? Because I recall so many moments personally in theater when you're literally sitting there speechless and you're just in awe. And how do you describe what that means? How do you really truly understand what it takes for an audience to sit there in that state of absolute and unabandoned awe? It's just kind of a fun word to say.
Yeah. It's my favorite word because, and I agree with you completely. The reason why I am in art is because I saw the power that stories have to create that more. And it's different for everyone. And the way you tell a story makes all the difference in the story you're trying to tell and how it connects with people. But to be in a movie theater and and there are only a handful of times I can remember feeling this in the movie theater, but it's the most perfect feeling to just feel oh, holy crap, this is everything to me right now. And just feeling you're connected with everyone in the theater or everyone around you is such a magical feeling. And movies have the power to do that in such an interesting way, as does theater, visual art, stories, and all that stuff. But I think if you if you're passionate about the story you want to tell and you aim to help people see that same thing that you're seeking, I think in some ways, as storytellers, we're all seeking to feel that ourselves, right? Because otherwise, why are you doing it? If you aim for that, then you're at least going to do something worthwhile along the way, even if the product isn't exactly what you hoped it would be. I think that is such a beautiful pursuit to me. And I feel really good about it every time I hear someone talking about their passion and how good they feel just creating. But it's just, you just got to do it, right?
Totally. Yeah. So just a little backstory for our filmmakers here. Sinjin and I, came up in film school, and we partnered up on a lot of different projects, film and theater. But I would love for you, Sinjin, to take me way, way back to the moment, the spark that you got, that you knew you wanted to be a storyteller. And, feel free to take that in any direction that you want. I love that sort of origination story to hear from every filmmaker, every storyteller. What was that one little moment? Describe what was happening around you. What was in front of your eyes? What was in your ears? Tell me that story.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that there are, for me, maybe 3 moments, and that's too many moments for what you're asking, but I'm going to try to go through them fast. But like the first moment for me is like, when I was a kid, we were super duper poor. Sometimes my mom would take us to the dollar store, and like we would get to pick out like one thing, and we didn't have any money. So I was like, okay, well, I want these tapes. And so there were these like, the like cassette tapes that are blank. And we had my mom listened to the radio pretty much 100% of the time at our house. And so there was a radio that had a cool little cassette recorder. And so when at the darker periods, I would just go in my room, in my closet, and I would put a blank tape in the dark. And I would just sit there and I would tell myself stories, and they weren't anything about me. They were mostly science fiction. But it was something that I like felt really connected with the world around me. And it was a way to be somewhere else and not there. And the stories I told were generally pretty dark. They weren't very happy, but like, I was like, oh, these characters are interesting. I can like live in those moments. I think that's the first moment to me where I knew that like being a storytelling artist was something that I wanted to do, because it was the one time where I felt absolutely and utterly myself. Like I wasn't putting on a show for anyone. I knew no one was ever going to see or hear those tapes, but I just loved doing it. And I think that's a magical feeling. And then I know in high school, I had done a bunch of plays when I was in elementary school and middle school with the neighborhood. I'd just written short stories, and then we performed them out loud. But I was always really interested in like how the audience saw them. So I would like orient the stage in like weird ways so that the audience could only see certain things. And certainly didn't know at the time that what I was doing was like trying to frame a shot in a way that like that controls the audience's perspective, which is a very unique thing about film. But when I went to high school, I like was really into movies, would go see a lot of midnight showings. And I remember seeing The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And it wasn't even the movie itself. The movie is a great movie. It's a fine movie, but it's the 2005 version. It was the soundtrack to that film. And like hearing that soundtrack to the first time and hearing how I was like kind of interested in what was happening on screen, but the music, I was like completely and utterly brought to a different place, a different time. And to know that the music accompanying this film could do that for me much more powerfully than the visual imagery gave me that like really beautiful sense of like, oh, film might be a place where I could do some of this stuff that I've been interested in. And then like, interestingly enough, I think that like some of our first projects together was when I knew that I really loved filmmaking, because I didn't really know when I started film school that film was something that I was really passionate about. I knew I loved stories. I knew that I was really invested in like framing a story interestingly, but like, we did this like sound design project where we like had to
I still have it somewhere on my hard drive.
Oh yeah. I feel confident that I could find it. And like, this like it was like a very weird situation where we're like having to do the sound design. And as was the case with most of the projects we did during film school together, we like completely ignored the assignment and just decided to do what we felt like was going to be something good. And like the assignment was just to layer sounds together and to create a soundscape. And we were like, oh, we should do it with a poem. We like recorded the poem. We like did this like really interesting layering. And like, I remember learning a lot from you around like the perspectives of like layering sounds and understanding the technicality of it. But also like our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lighting project, which Brian talked about when he was on this show. Like also just like being in a room with people who are committed to doing cool stuff and like just pushing the boundaries of how cool something could be is a world that like I had not experienced before. And to do that with you and Brian and Darren were like some of the best moments of my existence. I think together, those are the 3 moments that like made me understand that like I don't only practice in film. I do a lot of work in theater and visual arts and poetry and all that stuff. But that film is something that I will always love because it's the only place where it's actually film is such a collaborative art form and it's so hard to make a film. It's just actually really hard. And not because you necessarily need all this stuff. It's just that there's like a lot of logistics involved and you can simplify them by working with people you care about. And you can simplify them by being passionate about the story. But because you need and should and like not should, you sort of like want to engage other voices because film is a collection. Film is a medium where it's a connection of art forms that are all working in beautiful symphony together to make something that is larger than the sum of its parts. And so like, it was so magical to be a part of film sets where people had some cool other skill sets that I didn't have and disagreed with me all the time. And like because we disagreed and because we were all equally passionate about a project and had drastically different perspectives about how to do it, the work came out better. And that doesn't happen in every art form. And it's such a gift, you know?
Right. You mentioned being in a room with people that are passionate about the thing that you're creating. How do you surround yourself with people that are passionate about the thing that you're creating? Because typically in film, you have the writer, you have the director, perhaps it's the same person and it's their vision. And of course, there will be other voices that bring their own piece into it as it, like you mentioned, it's a collaborative art form. But how do you truly bring people together around this common goal, this common path taking forward, even though there are so many egos involved?
Yeah. I mean, I think to me, it comes down to story, right? I think that you and I have done projects, I've done projects, you've done projects separate from each other that there's no budget. There's like, we don't know how it's going to get done. Like, I can't say that you're going to get a lot of money from this project, but I can say that like, I am so fundamentally invested in this that it's going to happen whether you're here or not. And like, I know also that like, I think the skills that I try to cultivate very, very often is like a way to talk about the story that I'm trying to tell in a way that I can communicate both the passion that I feel about the story, but also where other people's artistry comes into play. So like, you know, thinking about, because I know Brian talked about the one that Stolen project and, you know, that the initiation about that project is really just about like saying, what if we turn that on its head? You know, what if there was only one light? What if there was only 2 lights, 3 lights, 4 lights, 5? Like, how do we make something so that it feels different than what this is happening? And it just is cool, right? And it's cool because when we start talking about it, it becomes this like chamber of ideas bouncing across for each other. And if you leave space, I think in your vision for others, then people want to be on board. But I think it starts with the passion and like knowing that like, oh man, I need to tell this story. And I know that I need to tell this story in my soul. And like, I don't know that I have all the tools that I need to tell this story right now. And let me get the people to tell this story. But let me feel confident that I know that I need to tell this story. And let me feel confident that while I may not know exactly how it's going to turn out, it is important for me to tell this story in this moment. And if you go into any conversation with that feeling, I think my experience is that people are wanting to get on board. And it's different than starting a project with a business mind and have done that many times before as well. But like, if you're launching on a project that's meant to be a passion project and you don't start with passion, you start with logistics, then you have a problem. Right. You have a problem because people will be on your project, but they're there because they're filling a gap that you needed. And the gap is a tactical gap. The gap is like, oh, I need a gaffer to light this film, or I need an assistant director to help keep us on time. But they're not filling a role in the story you're trying to tell. They're not passionately engaged in that story. And so if you approach it, and you can do both of those things simultaneously, where you keep the business side business and professional, but also you like make sure that the people that you're wanting to work with are passionate about the story also. Because otherwise, like, you might as well go be a PA on a set, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong. And there's like huge amounts of work and beautiful passion to be done on set in that capacity, and working your way up, being a production assistant, doing all the like logistical, tactical work. And that's how larger film productions work. But I don't, and will probably never work on that scale. And a lot of the reason for that is because the stories I want to tell with people who also want to tell those stories. And if you want to do that, then I think going at it from a story first perspective, looking at the story and being like, why am I passionate about this? And how can I share my passion about this with the people who I want to come and work with me on this? And whether there's money involved or not, I think that passion part is really important. Or certainly has been important for me.
If there's ever a need to learn how to let go of your own sort of predispositions about what your story needs to be, it's filmmaking, because like you said, it's such a collaborative art form. So with that, I would love for you to touch on the sort of inception of your feature film, Sun, Moon, Stars, Rain. How did that idea come about? Did you start with character? Did you start with concept? What was the sort of launching point for that project?
Yeah, great question. I think that, so I'd written a poem called Evangeline, and that happened when I was still in undergrad. And we had done, there was a different short film that called After that I had done with this character of a prostitute who was just, the life was not that great. And she was like in the process of figuring out if she wanted to commit suicide. There's all these deep, and I was super interested in that concept, and also did this weird performance art piece with that poem that was also very strange. That was fun. And I was really just enraptured by this character, and I wanted to see her in a different part of her life, in a part of her life where she had more power and where she was in control. And that character, who Iona Layton ended up playing, the character of Evangeline in the second, I guess, scene of the piece, was where that started. And then I became interested because I wrote that scene, and on paper, it's a certain length and you don't know. And I was like, this is not a feature. But then I'm like, I love Denver, and I've loved Denver, and I live in California now, and I love Denver even more now that I live somewhere else. And I wanted a story. I was like, if I'm going to do this, if we're going to do a series of shorts or something that goes together, there needs to be something that connects it. And it felt like, in collaboration with you, with Brian, with other people, sort of trying to think about what projects would be good, thinking about, wow, I want to see the stories of the middles of love stories. You don't get to see the middles of things. They're like hard, kind of shitty parts of love stories that are like just not that pleasant. And they often get thrown out of romantic comedies because they're not funny. They often get thrown out of romantic dramas because they're just like hard and they don't drive a lot. But like, I'm interested in like not knowing how this thing began and not knowing how it's going to end, but digging real deep into the middle and having that uncertainty. And I think that I became kind of obsessed with this idea of like, I've never seen a movie that shows me the middle of a love story and doesn't feel obliged to tell me the end of it. And I have it's not a pessimistic view of love stories, but I just don't feel enraptured by those stories very often, where it's a love story. And I feel like in big Hollywood films, it's often shoehorned in. There just has to be this love story, and it's an angle that feels very important. But I'm like, what if we focus on these people and how hard it is just to like create or sustain love in any capacity? And that's sort of where the idea came from. And it's the title is based off of this poem, which doesn't have a title, by E.E. Cummings, called Anyone. I mean, it doesn't have a title, but people colloquially give his poems titles all the time. It's called Anybody When It Lived in a Pretty How Town. And this is a love story. And like, it's a hard love story, and it's about these people who find love, and you don't really get to know the beginning or the end. And it's just like this, and this is my reading of the poem. Maybe other people who are scholars on the poetry will have different readings of it. But, you know, I love the like cyclical nature of this. Time passes, sun, moon, stars, rain. You get these cyclical things and things just keep going. And, you know, there's a line in the poem that's, anyone died, I guess, and the name of the character is anyone. And it's just like this very casual thing where one of the characters of this poem is just dead now. And it's just like so casually, but that's how most of us live our lives, right? It's just this idea that like, yeah, this is a love story, but you know what? It's not important. It's not important because, and it's important to these people in every possible way. And is it making large scale statements about the way we live our lives? Nope. Is it changing the way we look at love? Nope. These are just two people trying to live their lives and having love. And that to me is such a beautiful thing to explore. And that's sort of where the inception of it started.
So it's sort of like really putting forth that insignificance, the outwardly look into our lives and how humanity really always tries to put forward meaning to things, right? We're always trying to define the things that are happening in our lives, like why me, that sort of thing. I think that's such a just a cool perspective also with the way that you approach things, because as we talked earlier about the Soundscape project, you know, you were the one that turned me on to slam poetry, and we actually recorded the slam poem together, spoken word, where it was my first exposition to that kind of work. And it was such an intriguing way for me to launch a project, to where we were having these, production meetings towards the beginning of pre-production, where we would talk about that poem and kind of really, you broke it down to us, not in terms of like, here's a stanza, here's a line. It was more about the sort of what's in between those lines. And I think that's it's just a cool way to find inspiration too. Like you can really get inspiration from sculpture, from a painting, from a thing that happened to you at a coffee shop, or from a poem, just like you're describing. Is that something that happens to you often, where you find inspiration in poetry and in sort of these, obscure places?
I mean, yeah, I think that so I consider myself a transmedia artist. I work across mediums on purpose because I think that we have so much to learn from different medias to make whatever medium you choose to create in more meaningful and more powerful, right? The way that, for instance, poetry gets to the most small moments of existence, right? These like the poetic gesture, like such small things on a page, and how those things can be so big. And like, it's the smallest, it's simultaneously a very small and very large art form. And you can learn so much about how to tell a story and how to get a sense of character so quickly and so meaningfully from a poem. Because in poetry, you have to set up, if you're doing a poem about a character, you can't describe a character. You don't get to see them. I have to know about this character immediately with 3 words, with 1 word, with a space between 2 words, right? Mm-hmm. And so like, it's so much to learn about filmmaking from that, about how to immediately understand who a character is without words, with small words, with illumination from sources that are not normal, or like just off of the beaten path or obscure. Same thing with visual art. Like I'm looking at right now a new visual art series that I'm working on that's about symbols and about semiotics. And I think that there's something to be learned about how do you represent symbols on a canvas where there's no movement involved, where you're just, your eye is there. And how do you draw someone's attention? It tells us so much about composition, and painters know more about composition than filmmakers. So how can I learn from painters about composition? Because they do it much more than I do. Or like, theater is a very live art form, but also it's about that interpersonal connection. It's about the live interaction between 2 people. Theater is about conflict between human beings. And in some ways, film is the same thing, but it's a very different exploration of those 2 concepts, of that concept, sorry. But how can I learn about how to create a scene and create intimate moments between people that are large enough to capture from a wide shot, but intimate enough to capture from a close-up? And theater
Mhm.
has all of those things as well. So, I mean, yeah, I think I often take inspiration, or try to find inspiration at least, and try to be open to finding inspiration in a lot of different places, because I think that otherwise my stories would all be this, in my mind, for myself, my stories would all be the same. I think what hopefully makes me a meaningful storyteller to someone one day is not that I was able to tell a story well necessarily, but that I was able to tell a story from a perspective that was unexpected, and that you can feel the passion in the way that I'm telling that story. And it's meaningful because of that. Because the general or relative goodness or badness of the quality of the piece is something that I've like really shirked very significantly, because it annoys me at this point. But like the passion with which you tell a story, and the depth with which you navigate through the different manners, and are a student of that story and of all the things that create that story, I think is what separates one story from another.
God, I'm doing my best to follow you, Sinjin, because you're just dropping so much insight that I think a lot of people are not necessarily courageous enough to talk about. There's this perspective or artistry that, you know, people get kind of bogged down in the weeds of the technical. And you talked about this earlier, the tactical versus the strategy of how you actually tell a story. What's your strategy? And perhaps we can touch on one last piece with Sun, Moon, Stars, Rain. What was the most frustrating part about the whole process? And how did you deal with that, you know, strategically?
Yeah. I mean, Sun, Moon, Stars, Rain in a lot of ways was like a crash course in feature filmmaking, because like, Jesus, I was not prepared for the amount. And we did it. This is a 5-day shoot we did, right? And this is we shot it in 5 freaking days. And some of them weren't full days. Like the first scene in the first long scene is a 45-minute scene that we shot in one take, one go through it essentially. And we really shot it at night because we needed to see the skyline of Denver as a part of it. And it was something that this is one of the things that's a part of my filmmaking, has become more of a part of it, even since Sun, Moon, Stars, Rain, because it's different if you're doing client projects versus passion projects. I don't like shooting more than 3 takes of something. Like if it needs more than 3 takes, then it's not there for us, and we'll just cut it.
Look, my shoulder appreciates that.
I mean, you bore the brunt of that chaos, but like, you know, I think that there were a couple of pieces of frustration. One, that like the last scene, the big practical challenging scene of that shoot was the third sort of story of this piece was a story of a relationship, and you get to see them over the course of a significant period of time. And it all takes place in this apartment except for the opening sequence, which is like a long, very long walk in the film with no cuts of just this woman who just found out that she's pregnant, and she's just walking home. And it's like a 4-block walk with no cuts, and but it cuts back and forth, but there are no cuts in the camera. But time is passing and moving forward and back, and people are changing costumes. And in the apartment, there's like furniture moving and art being changed and all of this stuff. And I think that, you know, I'm happy we did it the way that we did. It was frustrating because it was nearly impossible to accomplish. And like, we were there, and it's like, on day 1, when we were blocking, it was like, oh yeah, we just don't have enough time. Like, obviously here we are, and we just don't have enough time for this. And, you know, I paid the people whose spot we were renting, but it's not like we can be in there for like, on a film shoot that had a budget of $6 million, you would spend 3.5 weeks in this apartment doing this shot. And you probably wouldn't do it in one take, even still. Like, that's probably, people like the idea and the look of one take, but I'm interested in the commitment and the process of one takes, because I like how it makes actors work. I like how the liveness of it, and like, there's a sacrifice we made as a part of that process. Certainly I made, of like, oh, we can't do that. That's just not a thing we can do. It sounds cool, would be cool. Don't have the time. Can't do that. Is the texture of the movement of this piece going to be perfect? No, because you're moving backwards down a hallway with 17 people behind you, and like, everyone's trying to move out of the way to get here. The actors in the bathroom changing, trying to get ready for this really emotional scene. And like, you might hit a corner, and like, is that's gonna have to be okay. And like, I think there's a tricky part of anything where actually that crew was not massive, but it was like 10 of us in that space with the actors and with the crew, and like trying to keep the momentum up when everything feels like it's just so hard is like a really difficult thing. And, you know, and I think we all have, you know, and I'm still on a journey of being able to communicate vision and all of that stuff and what I care about and what I don't care about and I think that, you know, coming to terms with that relationship and communicating artistry to folks who have their own buy-in, like Jessica Paddock, who did the production design for us, who is very phenomenal at the work that she does. And like, I'm like, okay, now do it in 7 seconds while this camera is not turned towards the actor. It's like very hard. And how do you keep the momentum up? And because that's also your role as a director and as a producer, is to like, how do we make sure, especially on a micro budget film, how do we make sure that people feel like they're going to leave this and feel proud of the work that they did? Knowing that, of course, this is a super small budget film. We paid everyone, but not a lot. And it was a matter of like trying to keep that energy up. And also like, I'm thinking about the first scene now where, you know, you were shoulder mounted the whole time. And this is a 45-minute scene. And the actors, I don't rehearse scenes with actors either. Like that's not a thing I'm interested in doing, because I'm interested, especially with those characters who were meeting for the first time in this room. I like didn't allow them to rehearse the scene ahead of time. And well, that is,
I think, I'm sorry to interrupt that. I think it's important to note that you didn't rehearse because you had the confidence in the people that you cast. You had the confidence in your casting that they were even if they weren't, you know, Hollywood or, you know, had all of these projects under their belt, you cast with such intentionality that you had the confidence in them to be able to pull off. And you keep mentioning the word process versus the final product. And I would love for you to, once you finish your thought, to really touch on that, like the importance of process versus product.
Yeah. So yeah, I will absolutely say that. One, we did have rehearsals with those actors, and what I focus on in rehearsals is character. And we did a pretty extensive audition process for this piece, and remarkably confident and incredibly, I still have conversations with Iona now and like love the work that was done on that. And we always knew, and I always told them it was going to be hard, because the way I like to work with good actors and you find the right actors for the role is like, let's have a conversation about this character. Let's do weird ass exercises around developing character and physicality. And then like, we're not going to practice. We'll look at some movement pieces. We'll look at some sections and some blocking. And then this is your thing. This is not my thing anymore. I know the feeling. I've communicated the way that I want this to feel. I've communicated the experience we're trying to share. But like when push comes to shove in the moment in this scene, like what I want to see is you guys doing what you do best. Like it shouldn't have my hands on it. I hate the feeling of knowing that like an actor is doing this thing because you can tell that they needed to cheat out to the camera. And I respect the need to do that in situations. And we've done client work where that's really important. And I've done work for theaters and for other people that needs to happen. I respect that for the form itself. But for the art of it, I like don't need to see all of that. I want to be in the room and I want to be enraptured. And I was sitting in a corner in the bathroom with this camera on your shoulder. And I'm just like watching, just trying to be overcome with this scene. And that's how I know it's working. If I have forgotten that this is a movie that I'm watching and I just feel like I'm in a room with two people having a very uncomfortable conversation and doing some very uncomfortable things. And that's to me is the beauty of the process. And so just to finish up the thought on like frustration points and all that stuff, when you're in that bathtub and you do the first take and you have this moment where you're like, maybe this was like the shittiest idea I've ever had in my life. Like, is this even going to work? And like, how do I, as the director who said, like, you're the one who said this would work and everyone trusts you that it would work. And people are like, yeah. Sinjin has good ideas. Like, sure, this is going to be a thing. And you're watching the first take on a monitor and you're like, oh, what if this doesn't work? This is garbage. Like this is not anything what I wanted. And how do I, knowing that we need to be done in this place, I mean, I don't want to keep these people here until 7 a.m. And knowing that like, this is a very challenging thing to do more than 3 times anyway. And knowing that like, it's not going to get better over time. How do I make sure that I can communicate effectively such that we get what we need in the next 2 takes and we don't feel like we need, and everyone leaves here feeling good, even if they don't feel satisfied, because I don't know that you ever feel satisfied, especially as a performer, when you're like, you have 3 takes and that's it. And you feel like if I had just one more take, I could do it. I could do it perfectly. But like, that's not a real thing. And I don't like perfection. So I think that's a frustrating thing that you learn in any longer extended process, you know, where you're like having to make trade-offs about like, that moment is not going to land unless we do this specific thing. If we do this specific thing, then all George as a DP is going to be thinking about is that moment. If we do that specific thing, then all the actor is going to be thinking about is that moment. So how do I communicate in such a way that's broad enough that these artists can still have the sandbox with which to play and choose the shots as they're going, but also get that feeling and get this moment across in a way that also feels authentic to the idea. And I think that's hard. And I think I was pretty fresh to that. I had directed a number of things before. I'm lucky enough with Perplexity and with you to have directed like a good number of things by the time that film came up. But like, it's different. It's a different beast, especially with the amount of money that was on the line and the complete and utter trust people put on you as a director. And so I think that's really, those are the big frustration points. And just, you know, money is always a thing, right? And like, where you're like, I want to respect these people's time. And I know that if we had an 18-day shoot, this would like, there are things about this that would be sleeker, that would be smoother. And is that the vision of this? And having to come to terms with what the vision and the scope of a project is and getting it out there anyway, because you feel passionate about the story and not waiting for funders to necessarily come through if you know that it's going to be a hard sell, or shooting the project in short form and then trying to pitch on that. Or, you know, it's just about a series of trade-offs that you make as an independent filmmaker. And what is important to you, I think, becomes the question that you should ask yourself all the time. Does it really need to be a $6 million project? Or can you make it because it's going to be fun, it's going to be cool, and the story is worth telling? And I think that's a really valuable thing. And I think that goes to the process question that and I think as I've gotten further in my career, I become so much more engaged with process. We're doing this Winter in Row project with the Foundry of Ether, and it's all process. It's all about like, let's do something cool because there's something pure in the idea of artists creating art for the sake of it. And like, film is an art form that has never been separate from audience. Like there are art forms that if you write a story, you can write a story just for yourself, as long as you don't share it with anyone. You can do a painting that's really meant to be cathartic, or a poem that's meant to be cathartic. Film as an art form really isn't, because there inherently are many people who are a part of the process, right? Unless you're with a camera on your own and there are no other people in this film or who will ever see this film, film is not separate from audience. And so I think I'm really interested in that exploration of how much can the audience feel the creative spirit of the creator, of the filmmakers, of the artists involved, and what is the purest form of art you can create? Because I think that like one of the things that we often give up as artists is that it's harder. It's certainly true for me that I find it harder to get enraptured by art the more I know about a form, right? Because like if I'm going to see a horror movie, for instance, and I just went to see a horror movie recently and had this exact experience, which is like, oh yeah, they're going to do a jump scare here. Oh, it makes sense. Here's the musical swell. And because I like know the format pretty well and I know how films are made. And so like I am overcome with happiness and joy when someone in the film does something that I don't expect, because there are all these expectations. And I think when you focus on process, when you focus on how can I get the director of photography in this artistic state where he or she is actively creating in the moment and is just in the moment doing this. How can I get the actors in a place where what they are doing is pure creation? How can I get the gaffer in a place where like during the shot, right, there can be adjustments or whatever the case might be, or between shots while watching, they can make adjustments and actively involved in that. And I found that for me, like, you know, there's this all this push for the best technology. Let's shoot in 4K. Let's, shoot in 8K, 12K, whatever the number of Ks you need. Let's like get this technology out there and it'll be cool. But like the coolest thing I've done in the last 5 years is when I was on vacation in New York, I like got this like abstract footage of me and a friend of mine, and I put it to poetry. And then I got a VHS camcorder because I'm like super interested in how the quality of that footage looks. And I just refilmed everything on the VHS camcorder. And like now the quality is objectively garbage, right? This like 4:3 really, but it's the coolest thing I think I've done in like 10 years because I'm like, this is more about the feeling it evokes in you and less about, are there enough pixels per inch to make it like crystal clear on my 4K monitor, right? It's more about, it helps me as an audience member of this art piece forget that I'm supposed to care about, how well framed this shot is, and reminds me that it's my job as an audience member to care about the story that's being told to me. And I think the more we can push an audience to be engaged in the story, the better off we'll be. And I think that you do that by making sure that the story is at the core of every aspect of the production, even so far as like, how actively is your director of photography thinking about the story while they are filming? How actively is, your assistant director thinking about the story in the scheduling? Like how are we making the process a core part of the story that's being developed? And that to me is very interesting. I don't know if that was an answer to your question.
Well, no, that's actually a perfect segue into my next question, which is, what's coming in the future? You're working on this Winter and Woe project, and you kind of gave a very broad spectrum of what the project is. But can you give our filmmakers kind of the log line of the project, like what's coming up and why did this evolve?
Yeah. I'll start with the second question because I think it's easier. So I started this thing called Foundry of Ether earlier this year. And it was really because, funnily enough, I was talking about sitting in a dark room telling stories. Like, I was like, I miss storytelling.
It's a full circle.
I know. What you've done here is you've led me in a great direction. You're a genius. I think that I miss that because I'm doing a lot. I run a theater company right now and do a lot of doing a lot of visual artwork, but I miss like the purest form of storytelling, and I wanted to know if I could do it. So I started doing these other like live stream things that were with another organization. And I was like, yeah, I guess I can still do that. And I'm having a good time doing it. So I started Foundry of Ether to like really be a place to forge stories. The idea being to like forge stories in a variety of different capacities. And so we started, and I brought Adam Blair, who was on the podcast as well. I brought him on board because he has all this interesting exploration in his PhD dissertation around the idea of evocation and idea of artists responding. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to improv a story, why not have someone improvise music to go with that story? And I think that's a super cool concept. And Foundry of Ether is sort of evolving. We have a lot of projects probably going to do a larger scale fiction podcast. I did a short film because I was like, I haven't shot a film since I moved here to California. And like, do I still know how to do that? Let's try. And so I did that, and I just did it. And like, and going to do more of that and release those things. And Winter and Woe so it's a visual poetry album. And I started thinking about Winter and Woe a very long time ago. I think actually during Perplexity years, and like was very fast because I think was very inspired by visual albums, visual musical albums, and also really invested in obviously poetry and was interested in this idea of what a visual poetry album could look like. And I had this folder on my Google Drive for a long time. Was just like sitting there waiting to be done and didn't feel inspired to do it, but like I made even a track list of the poems I would use, but it was like not sold on the idea. But then I like, in talking with Adam about evocations and about some of the stuff he was interested in doing, and this like idea of like artistic telephone and all of this stuff. And it unlocked the idea for me in a way that felt like it was feasible, where I could be like, oh, you know what? It doesn't have to be just me creating this. Like I have poems, I can record poems, but like, how cool would it be if I know a lot of really dope filmmakers like yourself, like, and I know a lot of really dope musicians like Adam, like many other people we've worked with in the past. If I could just get all these people to like come on this weird journey, then we just have a visual poetry album. And it's not about the quality of it. It's about like saying, here's a recording of a poem. You don't even get to see the words of the poem. Respond to this artistically and create something. And it can be still images. As if you're a filmmaker, it can be film. You can film it like on your, on like the first cell phone camera that's ever existed. You can film it, on, I don't know, a record player. If you can make that work, you can film it on film and scratch the thing into the surface in a very old school capacity, like whatever you want to do. Just like, how does this inspire you to create? And the same with music. Like, I don't care what music it is or what style, or like, is this just you in your bathroom with a paper plate? Is this like you in a symphony orchestra? Whatever you want to do, just like, let's see what it's like, and want to give people the option to toggle and to experience the poem, however, or not the poem, to experience this piece however they'd like. So we're working on this structure where it's like, oh yeah, here's the written piece. And also here's this sort of player, but you can toggle on and off the music. You can toggle on and off the video. You can toggle on and off the poem. And I think it's just a starting place. It's a proof of concept structure to see like, because logistically, when you get, a dozen, 2 dozen artists on board, it becomes challenging to like wrangle people. But like, I'm interested in doing more stuff as it moves forward, where we're like, oh, it doesn't have to be my poems. It was easy to do my poems here because I had the poems and I could record them really easily. But like, let's get other poets. I know also some dope poets to record their poems. Let's do a thing where it's just like, what one person responds to one thing and the next person responds to the thing that was created by the second person. And then no one knows what the original thing is. And so like, to me, it's just about exploring. I'm really fascinated right now about exploring all the different ways that a story can happen, and like less interested in let's make something that some big name, big money person is going to see and be super excited about. And and it feels very refreshing to me to feel like, you know what? I don't care if anyone ever sees this. I create because I have to create, and I've tried not to, and it doesn't work. So I have to do this anyway. I'm really passionate about these poems or these stories of this movie, and I think it needs to get made. So let me get together people. Let me try to get enough money so that we can pay them. But even if not, like, let's do something because we care about it. And if someone sees it, that's dope. Great. But if someone doesn't see it, we're still a bunch of dope artists creating dope things in the dopest way we know how. And like, isn't that the purpose of art? Like, isn't that what we all do it for anyway?
That's so dope. It makes me think of kind of this journey of an artist, because you start up with, having this kind of spark of inspiration that you want to create something, and you start learning and geeking out about that thing. Like, how do I actually, use this brush? How do I use this camera to create and tell the story that I want to put forward, and have the 2 or 3 viewers on YouTube watch it and tell me that it's crap, whatever that is. It's sort of just this playground. Like, that's the way that I'm thinking about it. And I have the honor to evoke one of the poem recordings, and I'm trying my best not to have all of these predispositions and these ideas formulating, because as artists, you automatically start the default of like, okay, what are the shots going to be like? What's the color palette? What's the tone? What's the mood? All of those things. But it's really kind of like you said, it's very freeing, where you just get to play, and, you just play the poem and you see what that evokes. And I think that concept is so fascinating. I'm so excited to see where it goes and how it goes. I'm going to be gearing up to actually do my piece here in a little bit, but Sinjin, I could keep talking to you for hours about Sun, Moon, Stars, Rain, about Foundry of Ether. I think this is just a very unique way of going about filmmaking, about storytelling, and all things to do with stories, because that's who we are. We are storytellers. and will continue to be until we die. And I think that's just beautiful. I have two last questions for you. This next one is a doozy. What is your deserted island movie? So if you could only watch one film for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Yeah, that is a doozy. You know, my inclination to try to impress people would be to name like a high-minded movie that's like, oh, this is so much depth and meaning.
Like Synecdoche in New York?
Yeah, it's still my favorite movie of all time.
Oh, yeah?
Here's what I know. I know for sure that I would not want to watch that movie for the rest of my life. Like that's a movie that like I kind of only want to watch like once a year or once every 6 years, maybe.
Right.
You know what movie I think I would probably choose? And this is crazy to me, but I think I would choose Elf. Like my first instinct is like, Elf makes me happy. Yeah. Like there's so much joy in that movie. And I'm like I'm not a big Christmas person at all. Like but like there's something beautifully innocent about that movie that I just really love experiencing. And I could watch that movie every single day and I would not get tired of it. So I guess that's the answer.
Elf.
Confusing to everyone, including myself, because it's not but it's the first thing that came to mind. And the more I think about it, the more I'm like, yep, that's the movie. I would just watch it.
Vocation for you.
Yeah.
All right. Last question for you. Where can our filmmakers go on the internets, on the interwebs to find out more about you and about the projects that you're working on?
Yeah. Well, first, let me say this before I answer this last question. I owe you an immense amount of thanks for the amount of incredible influence that you've had on my artistic career. So I also, you play sort of like supporting and like lifting voices on this podcast, but also your listeners should know that like you have been an incredible influence, certainly on me and on many people in the filmmaking community. And like that I don't think can be understated. And like your work and your commitment to professionalism and all that stuff is always and will continue to be very impressive. And I care deeply about you. Yeah, no need to thank me. It's true.
I got chills. I did. I really did.
And then I also, where can people see stuff? Well, I run a theater called The Pear Theater, thepair.org. If you want to see the theater work that I do, my website is sinjinjones.com. If you want to see a variety of work from a variety of backgrounds, Sun, Moon, Stars, Rain is up on the website along with After, which is the sort of pre Sun, Moon, Stars, Rain. I would give a significant like viewing warning to After because it's graphic. And then Foundry of Ether, www.foundryofether.com is where we're doing right now. There's a bunch of the sort of Foundry and Ether podcasts that we started doing, these sort of like improvised stories. And the first sort of season of those are up. And there'll be a lot more of stuff on the Foundry of Ether website this fall, including the film Standing. And then when we get Winter and Woe up in December, and then a narrative podcast as well. So those are the three places, I guess. My Instagram page for my visual artwork, my Instagram page at Sinjin Jones is where I post any and all visual art stuff. But that's really all I post there.
So much stuff to check out. So filmmakers, please check out the show notes. I'll have all the links down there. Sinjin, I cannot thank you enough for being on the Filmmaker Secrets podcast. It has been my absolute pleasure.
No, thank you for having me. I'm sorry it took so long, but I'm glad that we made it work.
If you like that, then you are going to love my Cine Racing Challenge. This is a 7-day filmmaking competition where your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to write, shoot, and edit a short 60-second film in just 7 days for your one chance to win with over $10,000 in prizes. So head over to cineracing.com. That's cineracing.com to get registered. Spots are filling up fast and the timer is ticking before the next Cine Racing Challenge launches. So be sure to head over to cineracing.com right now to get registered. I'll see you over there.